of course, and it does obviously indicate that among visible minorities, still 24%, sometimes, mostly, or always do feel uncomfortable. So we're not all the way there yet. Okay, Canadians reporting discrimination or unfair treatment, sometimes or often in the past 5 years. This is in 2002. And you can see that the low is among Chinese and the high, 9.5%, is among blacks, for those that feel a sense of discrimination. Okay, who doesn't want a neighbor of a different race across countries? It's interesting, it's a real sweep, right? We've got a lot of different national opinions on this. And Canada's plight is the lowest among these countries. So with Egypt being the highest. Egypt, India, and South Korea, generally those folks don't want a neighbor of a different race. And I'm surprised the US is that low. Russia, the US, and Canada are the lowest. Okay, a lot of information, so let's summarize. Okay, Canada is a very multicultural society, and relative to other countries, there actually seems to be a lot of popular support for racial and ethnic diversity and for immigration. But that doesn't mean that there's no discrimination. Discrimination certainly exists. Racialization certainly exists. And it may exist in particular for certain kinds of groups, like blacks and aboriginals. Here's a quick study that just makes this case. There was a study by Ginsberg and Henry a few years ago in Toronto. And this is how it went. They had two groups of folks who were making phone calls to try to get jobs. One group had a significant Caribbean accent, and the other did not. So one group had a significant Caribbean accent, and the other had no particular accent. Both groups were looking for jobs. And what do you think they found in Toronto a few years ago? They found that those who had the Caribbean accent on the phone were less likely to get job interviews than the equally qualified people who did not have a Caribbean accent. And that was a significant difference. So that's an example of a racialization process that leads to and enforces inequality right there. Okay? Even in Toronto, a very, very multicultural city, and even in the last few years. Nevertheless, what's interesting in Canada is that when you control for factors like incoming class status and education, ethnicity is actually a very poor indicator of socioeconomic status and mobility in Canada. And that's good news. Moreover, there's good news that ethnic inequality in Canada has been decreasing over time. So ethnicity is less and less a marker of social difference. Also, members of most ethnic groups experience considerable upward mobility over time in Canada. On the other hand, these generalizations hold for some groups, but not for all groups. Some racial minorities, particularly Aboriginals and particularly black men, face far greater obstacles than other minorities in terms of socioeconomic mobility. And here's another interesting thing. It's in sociology, more and more, we try to look not just at a single characteristic like race or ethnicity, but we try to show its intersection with other things like sex and gender. So, if you take ethnicity and you compare that by men and women, you find something really interesting, which is this, that the effects of being a visible minority the effects decline over generation and disappear for women. So for women, the consequences of being a visible minority has decreased over time and in many cases actually disappears. But the same effects are not seen among immigrant men. So what you have there is an interesting kind of interaction effect between sex and ethnicity, wherein, again, sex really matters in shaping the experience of immigration and the experience of being a visible minority, especially for black men. Now, these differences in socioeconomic mobility patterns by sex and by visible minority status remind us that racialization continues to happen, and it takes kind of complex forms. It seems to have a kind of sex component. And then the next question for us is to try to determine why that is the case. What is it about a particular interaction of sex and immigrant status or ethnic status that makes for these different structural experiences? And I'm going to leave it there.
I was thinking the same thing. Oh yeah, thank you.